So, first of all, I will call Mrs. Meltem Oktay. Good afternoon. You have the floor. And thank you for being with us.
Hello. I would also like to relate my regards to everyone. I'm sorry, I'm a bit excited and nervous. Normal. Evet. Yes, so my name is Meltem Oktay. I'm a journalist. And I used to work at Dicle News Agency, which was headquartered in Diyarbakir in 2013. I started to work as a journalist. I was working at Dicle News Agency in 2013. I started to work as a journalist. And at that period of time, in Turkey, we were going through a solution process between the Kurdish politics and the Turkish state. There was a solution process and negotiations were ongoing, and this process evolved to the resolution or solution process. In such an environment, I started to work as a journalist, and as of the end of 2014 and the beginning of 2015, this process started to deteriorate. Once again, the war process took over. And against the Kurdish politics, there were political genocide operations that were initiated. Many people were detained and they were arrested. Along with that, in Kurdish cities in Kurdistan, some self-government actions were proclaimed because people were saying that they wanted to manage their cities, their provinces themselves. In many cities, self-governments were proclaimed. This included Nusaybin, Yüksekova, Cizre, Silopi, and several other provinces in the southeast part of Turkey. And after the proclamation of self-government, and the pressure and oppression towards the Kurdish politics and the oppressions and detentions and arrests increased, and there were attacks against this self-government act. The demand to have self-government was a democratic demand for rights, and there were serious attacks, and we saw that the arms were now at stake. The weapons were now talking, and one of the places where the self-government was proclaimed was the sub-province of Nusaybin in the province of Mardin. And my news agency, Dicle News Agency, sent me to Nusaybin to report on the events that were happening there. In October 2015, as of the end of October 2015, I went to Nusaybin and I was following the occurrences and the events that were unfolding there. In the initial steps, I interviewed the Kurdish youngsters and the civilians who were living there. They were attacked. And we also saw the curfew, which was a practice from the 90s as a state of emergency practice. And this took many days, sometimes 9, 10, sometimes 14 days. There were curfews that were proclaimed. This was not only the case in Nusaybin, but also in Cizre, Yüksekova, and Silopi, which were other provinces and sub-provinces. So such curfews were proclaimed. So this actually means that this was a military operation. Whenever a curfew was declared, there were attacks in that sub-province or province. The forces of the government were attacking neighborhoods, quarters where civilians were residing, and they used to have these long barrel arms. They were opening fire, and the Kurdish youngsters also responded to this. So there was a mutual conflict. I followed the events there. For 6 months, I resided in Nusaybin, and I made news reports based on the events that were unfolding there. There were also some other journalists who were present there from the Turkish media. The majority of the journalists just went there. They just took a superficial photo and then they wrote their news articles. So there wasn't an in-depth news article. But I wanted to go to the area where civilians were living, where the operations were being held, and I stayed there. I lived with those people. Therefore, I was able to relate my news directly from the people. I reached out my microphone directly to the individuals. I started to hear their opinions, emotions. I wanted them to tell me what they thought, what they felt about those operations. I made news reports about this and I tried to raise their voice and communicate their opinions to the world's public opinion. And this war process continued for about 6 months. 7 times curfew was proclaimed during this period of 6 months. And finally, on the 14th of March in 2016, a curfew was proclaimed again. And we knew that this curfew, and we predicted that this curfew would last very long because we saw similar things happening elsewhere. And this curfew, along with this curfew that was proclaimed on the 14th of March, as you can see in this image, this is how Nusaybin looked like. There were hundreds of thousands of civilian residents living in this sub-province, but as a result of the bombing attacks and all kinds of arms, all kinds of weapons you can think of were used in order to bomb the places inhabited by civilians. Tanks, barrels, A4 devices, mortar pieces, mortar bombs were used in order to destroy and burn to the ground the residence areas of the civilians. Can you show the other image, please? Yes, this is also an image from that sub-province where I worked as a reporter. So why am I telling you all this? Because I was there for 6 months and I made news about all these events in order to communicate to the public, and I was turned into a target. There were also foreign journalists there. Most of them were detained and most of them were treated as if they were spies. For example, there were journalists from Der Spiegel, from Newsweek. There were many foreign correspondents and journalists. Most of them were detained. They were taken under custody. And at that period of time, a journalist colleague from Sandika.org, a news site, was taken under custody. I believe this colleague was under custody for one day, and they called me afterwards and they told me that my photo was shown to this journalist at the police station, and they asked this journalist about me. They asked this journalist, where is this individual? What is she doing and where is she? And at that time, I understood that I was actually being searched for and something could happen to me. But in spite of that, there were still newsworthy events there, and I felt the need to report on those. I felt this responsibility, so I continued to stay there. After the curfew that was proclaimed on the 14th of March, I went one neighborhood back and I rented a house. And Uğur Akgül, my journalist colleague, also came to live with me there, and we decided to report on this process together. There we were staying in a house. And in this period of time, so this curfew lasted very long. And on the 29th day, so namely on the 12th of April, there was a raid in the house where I was staying. I was at home and I was getting ready to appear on TV to relate the events that were unfolding there. And suddenly, in front of the door, I heard heavy armored vehicle engine sounds, and I immediately looked outside the window and I saw two armored vehicles stopped in front of the house. Several special operation officers and police officers came out of the vehicle, and I actually estimated that they were there to take me away. I knew this. And then these Special operation officers, around 15 of them were there, and there were 4 or 5 plainclothes officers. They used a ram head to break the door of the house where I was living in. They asked me my identity. When I told them my name, they told me they came to the house because they were looking for me, and they entered in the house. And at that time, my colleague Uğur Akgül was taken to another room by the special operation officers that entered the house. They took me to another room, but I could see Uğur from where I was. And they made him lie on the ground with his face down. And my colleague had actually been operated on his head before, and they battered him with kicks in his head. And at the same time, the special operation officer who was kicking him in the head was saying him, "Don't stay here. You can go to Kandil or Kamışlı. Don't stay in this place." This is what he was telling him. And I was in another room. I was watching this, and a plainclothes officer verbally insulted me. He threatened me, and he uttered some abuses against me, and he said, "We still have a lot to do with you. Let's go to the police station. I know how to make him talk," etc. He was threatening me, and he was verbally abusing me in this manner. And I would also like to mention, as a side note, that this process during which I had this experience was a process before the coup d'etat, the attempted coup in Turkey. So please also take this into account. So the police officers that came to detain us to our house, and these special operation officers, these special operatives, searched our house for about 2 hours. In 2 hours, they seized microphones, 2 computers, 2 cameras, 2 video cameras, 1 notepad, a diary, flash, USB sticks, etc. They seized them as if they were evidence of crime. They considered all of them as evidence of crime, and they put us in the armored vehicle. They took us to the detention center, which is the sub-province police station in Nusaybin. The first time we entered this sub-province police station or police department in Nusaybin, I was taken to another room by 1 male and 1 female police officer. The policewoman took me inside, and there I was stripped, and they searched me. They frisked me. They first unstripped me, and then they frisked me. So I had to go out afterwards, and the policeman told the policewoman, "Did you search her well?" And then she said yes. And then they had eye contact, and the policeman asked her to search me again, and they made me go into the room again. So twice I was subjected to, I was frisked twice, and I was totally stripped. And then we were taken to the police station. So we were under custody for a period of 2 days. So we were in this custodial prison. So once during the interrogation, without my lawyer, they took me out of this custodial prison. They took me to another room, and in this room there were 4 or 5 people who were dressed in civilian clothes. They were policemen, though, and they asked me to sit in front of them, and then they started to talk to me. They told me, "Okay, so you are young, you still have a bright future ahead of you. Help us, work with us. You can guarantee your future. You can rescue your future. You can help your family," etc. So indirectly, they proposed me to become an agent. So I told them that I would never talk, and I was never going to talk. And then they took me back to the custodial prison where I was previously held. There is something I forgot, let me tell you this. During the time when we were being detained, so when the policemen came to raid our house, as soon as we noticed this, I immediately sent a message to the news agency I was working at. I told them, "I am being taken under custody." I think this saved my life. The fact that I sent this message has saved my life. That's what I think. Because when we were under detention at the police station, a police officer told me, "You should pray that there is a news article about you in the press. Otherwise, you wouldn't have imagined what could have happened to you." Indeed, after I sent this message, Dicle News Agency made a report about this, and the Turkish public opinion heard that we were taken under custody in the war zone in Turkey, and nobody knew what would happen to us. So the fact that this became public, this information became public, was very critical, and it was a critical reason why we were actually rescued, because the police officer actually told me personally, you couldn't have imagined what would have otherwise happened to you if this wasn't heard on the news. So for 2 days we were in custody. On the second day we were prepared to be taken to court. They gave us our shoelaces, everything, etc. We were going to go to court. We were going to be taken to court. And because there was an arsenal that had fallen on the court building, and because of security situation, the court hearing was not held, so we were once again taken back to the custodial prison. The trial was postponed one day, but then one day later, at a hospital room, as a result of, or just for reason of formality, there was a table where a judge was sitting, and we were heard there. I hadn't given my testimony at the police station. I told them I wanted to give my testimony at the court, so I was taken to court in that room. As I mentioned, they asked me some questions. Did you make these news articles? Did you write these news articles? Did you take photos of the tanks? Did you talk to the youngsters who were fighting there, etc.? These were the questions that they asked me, and I told them, I'm a journalist. If needed, I would also have an interview with an armed person. If needed, I can also talk to all kinds of people because I'm a journalist. So I was in Nusaybin, and I was at the place where there was newsworthy events, and I also held my microphone to the people who had a gun in their hands. I also talked to the people who were living there, the children who were living there. I made news reports about the thoughts and opinions and feelings of the people who were living there. This is my duty. This is what I have to do. This is my responsibility as a journalist. So this is what I told them. But in spite of that, I was treated as if I was a member of a terrorist organization. And at the court on the 14th of April, I was arrested with the crime of being a member of a terrorist organization and for making propaganda of a terrorist organization. So I was sent to Mardin prison. In Mardin prison, I waited for a while until my indictment was drafted. My indictment was prepared. When I received the indictment, I saw that there were 9 witnesses who gave testimonies about me. One of them was MIT agency, the Turkish intelligence agency agent. And these were Kurdish youngsters that were taken out of the war zone from Nusaybin. And in the indictment, they told me that I was taking photos of the vehicles that were in the operation, the military vehicles in the operation, and that I was disclosing the operational information. So this was presented as evidence. So there was also a hidden or an unidentified witness. So there were 9 witnesses. So they told me that I had news resources who nobody else could avail of, or nobody else had access to the news resources that I had, and this was presented as a crime. And on the 24th of April, I had my first court hearing. So in the first court hearing, 8 out of the witnesses, 8 out of the 9 witnesses, they gave testimonies about me, said they gave these testimonies under torture, that these testimonies were not valid. They told that the accused was a journalist, so they withdrew the other statements. Only the testimony of the MIT, the Turkish Intelligence Agency officer, was accepted. So there was only one testimony against me. And then I was also still being put on trial as I was detained, and the second hearing was held on the 18th of June. And then, because of the lack of evidence for becoming a terrorist organization, I was released in such a way as to be trial without detention. So 4 months later, I was released. And after I was released, I started to again practice my journalistic activities where I was staying. I started to work once again for a digital news agency. I started to make reports, news reports. And the digital news agency where I was working for was also in such a situation. So there had been this coup attempt when I was being put on trial. Then I was released in the process of coup. And the digital news agency was closed down as a result of the decree in the force of law that was proclaimed after the coup attempt. So I was unemployed. And afterwards, there was a news site that was established, dhaber.net. This was established by the employees of the digital news agency, and I continued to work for the site. In total, only for a few months, I was free, and on the 25th of November, the final decisive hearing was held, and I was acquitted from the crime of being a member of a terrorist organization. And afterwards, uh, because of the crime of making a propaganda about a terrorist organization, I was condemned to 2 years. 1 year of this sentence was decided because I committed this crime by means of, or quote unquote, by means of news, by means of a press, and also because I use social media. They increased my sentence, so they increased my sentence for 2 years. So in total, I was condemned to 4 years. And only in a period of 15 days, this verdict was approved by the Court of Appeal, which is an intermediary court. So I was being searched as a wanted person. So because I had seen prison before I had this experience, I didn't want to go back to jail. So I decided to go abroad in this process. And I used my own means, my own possibilities. I traveled to Istanbul, and from there, I used some other means. I tried to escape to Europe. I went to Bulgaria with a group of refugees. I traveled to Bulgaria, and the Bulgarian police officers caught us when we went to Bulgaria. And off the record, or in an unrecorded fashion, they returned us to Turkey. We were also subjected to violence. They took away everything from our phones to the headphones, our money, everything we had. They pillaged all our belongings. And then we were thrown back to the Turkish side from Bulgaria. On the Turkish side, the gendarmerie seized us, and after they took the fingerprints there, they understood that there was a decision of arrest against me. So this was revealed, and I also learned that there was another court case against me, and I was taken to court when I was there. Because of a picture that I had taken in Nusaybin, a separate case was opened against me, a separate procedure was initiated against me, because in this photo, there were children who were holding weapons made of wood in their hands, and I had taken a picture of that. And because of that, I was again accused of making a propaganda of a terrorist organization. I was taken to court. I also gave my testimony there. And then I was sent to Edirne prison because of the fact that there was this decision to arrest me. So for 9 days, I was in Edirne in a solitary cell. And afterwards, I was taken to Gebze prison. This is where I was referred to. And then in order for the execution of the sentence that I was condemned to, I was in Gebze for 2 years and 7 months in Gebze. And in October in 2019, there was a judicial package that was proclaimed in Turkey. It was also mentioned in the report in the previous session. So for the execution of sentences that were below 5 years, they could be taken to appeal. So you could appeal against those sentences, because you could go to the Court of Cassation from the Court of Appeal, because the Court of Appeal had ratified my case, but then I had a chance to recourse to the Court of Cassation. So my sentence was postponed. So 1 month before the end of the sentence that I was condemned to, I was released from prison. There was only 1 month till the end of my sentence, but I was released. So after I was released, my case was taken to the Court of Cassation. Right now, my case file is still with the Court of Cassation in Turkey, and there was also an annex, an attachment that has been added to my case, and I think it's about 250 pages approximately. And all of these 250 pages consists of such images that I took in Nusaybin. It's all consisting of such pictures that I took there. So pictures of civilians, pictures of children, images of children that I had taken. So all of these were placed in the file for my legal case. So after I was released, I talked to my lawyer, and my lawyer told me that my freedom was in danger, and if she said that, my lawyer said that I could also again be arrested if if I were to be detained again. So I decided to go abroad once again. I tried to make a second attempt after the second release from prison. So on the 15th of January in 2020, I left Edirne to go to Greece. For 6 or 7 months, I stayed in Greece. Greece was not a secure place for me. Because of that, I crossed 4 countries on foot and I reached Europe. And today I stand here. I've made an asylum application and my application has been accepted. So I have been granted asylum. So only because of the news articles that I wrote, I have been put on trial, and the indictment only mentions the news articles that I wrote. This was the basis for the accusations against me, but this is not something that only I have experienced. Our colleagues can also show it on the video. You can see here all these journalists that you see. I'm also there. Only in that period of time, between 2015 and 2016, from Digital News Agency, 13 correspondents were arrested. These are colleagues from Digital News Agency. 13 of us were arrested. And this wasn't all of it, actually. So far, what we call free press, what we call Kurdish press, many colleagues from these Kurdish news agencies were arrested. Many correspondents, many journalists have been arrested. Most of them have their cases still on trial. Also, today we had a court hearing of 2 journalist colleagues in Turkey. So this is the overall picture in Turkey. I would also like to mention that Nedim Tülfent, a journalist colleague of mine, Nedim Tülfent, was also there. While I was reporting on the war process in Nusaybin, he was in Yüksekova and he was reporting on similar events. He was also taken under custody in that period of time. And while he was being taken under custody, while being taken from Hakkari to Van, he was stopped in an open area in the middle of nowhere. He was stopped by policemen and they put him on gunpoint and he was threatened with death. And this is what he states in his own testimonies. And maybe you also know, in Van, Osman Şivan and Servet Turgut, 2 villagers, were thrown off a helicopter in Van. This is a very recent incident. And 4 journalist colleagues who made news reports of this incident were also arrested for 3 or 4 months just because they reported on this incident where the 2 villagers were thrown off a helicopter. I also want to mention, as I had already mentioned, Digital News Agency was in the opposition because of the news articles, so it was closed with a decree of law. But even before the closure, for 50 times, it was prohibited for access. And then the colleagues opened dihaber.net. This is a website, and it was also banned from access for 16 times. Then it was also closed down with a decree in the force of law. And then our colleagues established Mesopotamia News Agency, and so far 34 times there was a ban of access against this news site. There is also Jin News Agency. It's the only female, all-female news agency in Anatolia, and it was also subjected to a ban for many times. And after Jin was closed down, they used the name Shujin. So they started a new site, and finally their last name is Jin News. So this is the all-female news agency, and they still continue to report in spite of all the oppressions.
Mrs. Oktay, thank you very much for this testimony. So now question time coming from the judges. Shall you start, Judge Bayens? And then Judge Pace.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you.
Online.
Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, pardon.
No problem. Thank you so much for your testimony. I have a couple of questions for you. The first one, which I think I know the answer, but I would still like to ask you. When you were telling us about the time that you moved to, or you were sent to Nusaybin to report on the conflict, you said that there were other journalists and that most of them, or many of them, were only superficially reporting on the developments. Can you explain why, in your opinion, they were not doing a more in-depth coverage of what was going on?
So my personal opinion is that it takes courage to report on these events. Only brave journalists are needed here. And also, you have to defend right-oriented journalism. So you have to defend a journalism that's focused on human rights. The foreign correspondents who were there really covered all these news. They showed great attention. They went to all the neighborhoods. They talked to the civilians. They were a bit more objective in order to report the events to the global public opinion. But unfortunately, we don't have this in Turkey. We have a free press and we have a pro-government press. There is nothing in between. So this pro-government press never ever dealt with those events. They didn't cover this. For example, there is a journalist called Nazlı Çelik. She is a famous journalist. She works for Star TV. She works in the pro-government media and press. And at that time, she went to Nusaybin. She came to Nusaybin, where I was also there, and I was in the neighborhood where the conflicts were occurring. I was only 700 meters away from the conflict. And at the place where I was working, I heard the bullets buzzing above me many times. I actually survived an imminent death. It's just that I'm lucky that I'm standing here in front of you now. But still, I defended people-oriented, right-oriented journalism. So I wanted to be in the thick of in the actual place where the events were unfolding. But Nazlı Çelik was in an armored vehicle, and she was protected by special operation policemen. And she didn't even enter the area where these conflicts were happening. She only was taken. She was given a tour in this armored vehicle, but she still covered the event as if she was in the heat of the event. And then she kept saying the terrorists are being hit, they are being eliminated, the barricades are being closed down, etc. And I was really surprised when I saw her because she was much behind me. She wasn't in the conflict zone. I was there personally. I was covering what was happening there. What she did is actually false news. It's fake news. And this is how the pro-government media works. And in order to gain favor or curry favor with the government, this is how they report on things.
Thank you. If I may ask you another question, and you are a female journalist, and I don't expect you necessarily to respond for all female journalists, but I would be very interested in learning from your perspective if there are particular challenges that female journalists are facing in Turkey. It can be from your own experience or from the experience of other colleagues. If there's any differentiated impact when it comes to female journalists exercising the profession in Turkey.
Yes, of course. It has definitely a different impact on you as a journalist when you're a female journalist. That's the case for all women journalists. When you are on the site where you are reporting on the news, you can be subjected to oppression or abuse. But in Turkish press, there is the following situation. You are double exposed because you are a Kurd and you're also a woman. So you are shown as a target and you are subjected to threats. They never see you as a journalist, but this is an overall situation, an overall attitude towards the Kurdish press. Generally, Kurdish journalists are not considered as journalists. This is also a criticism, actually. The European institutions also see it this way. There is this approach towards the Kurdish press. There are many employees of the Kurdish press outlets or media outlets. They report on many events happening in that region and they report on this to the whole world, but we are seen as terrorists. And of course, if you're a woman, it occurs even at a higher degree. Personally, as a journalist who was personally in that conflict zone, I also saw many other female colleagues there. So, of course, the war has a much deeper impact on women. That's true.
Can I ask a final question, Madam President? You're now in exile, but are you able to continue your work as a journalist? What is now your current occupation, if we may?
Mm. Well, for about 1 year, I have been here, so I made an application to obtain asylum and I took it very quickly. Currently, I'm residing in Switzerland, so I was granted asylum in a short period of time. So I continue to work as a journalist everywhere, also when I was in prison, and also here I still work as a journalist. Even when I was in prison, I was still reporting on things. Maybe it was difficult to report on things, but somehow I found my own ways to get the news out of the prison, and I also continue to work here as a journalist. I really like my profession. I think it's a very honorable profession. I currently work as a volunteer. I work as a voluntary journalist. I work for a media outlet, Medya Haber TV. So I still carry on with my journalistic activities.
Judge Pache, you have the floor now. Yeah. I don't.
Okay, it's my fault. I got used to being muted. Now you can hear me, right?
Problem.
Okay.
We hear you very well.
All right, thank you. Well, I was congratulating Meltem on her testimony and on her, I was saying she has my greatest admiration for her professionalism and courage in those circumstances. You were arrested originally, is it 2015 that you were originally arrested?
12 April 2015, I was taken under custody, and then on the 14th of April in 2015, I was arrested. I'm sorry, she says she's correcting herself. Just a second. 2016. 12 April 2016, and on the 14th of April 2016, so I correct myself, says the speaker, then I was arrested, yes.
Okay. So, you are Kurdish, I assume.
Evet. Yes, I'm a Kurd. I'm also Alawite.
What a combination. I was just wondering, your zeal and your persistence is extraordinary, even for a journalist, I must say. And I was wondering whether you ever got any kind of warning or idea before 2016 that your work and the way in which you did your work was possibly creating a risk for you. Did anybody, or did you ever get any indications about what was going to happen?
So you mean before I started to work?
When you were working in Nusaybin already, and when you were obviously engaging carrying out your work in a war-like situation where you showed us the destruction and the military involvement of the forces there and so on. I was just wondering whether when you were actually detained and then arrested, whether prior to that you had been given to understand that you might be running risks, as it were, whether anybody ever told you that you might get into trouble by your professional activity, or did it just come out of the blue?
Yes, so let me put it this way. Because I'm a Kurd, I'm not very foreign to such incidents. Let me put it clearly. For many generations, we have been living through this situation, through this victimhood. In 1995, my father was arrested because of the same reasons. He was accused of being a member of a terrorist organization. That was the claim. He was tortured. He went on a hunger strike when he was in prison to gain his rights. So, I'm not saying that we take this for granted or we see this as a normal thing as Kurds, but since yesterday I have been listening to many of the testimonies that have, many of the witnesses that have shown their testimonies here, but their victimhood started as of 2016. But the Kurds have been suffering for much longer. Ever since the establishment of the Republic of Turkey, we have been suffering this oppression, this arrest, this persecution. And in this period of time, as we went through all these, we also listened to the people from the Gülen congregation who gave testimonies here. So while we were suffering in the hands of the state, these Gülen members were also in the state authorities, actually. So we were victimized by the current victims in the past. So when I started to work for the press, the journalists who were teaching me this profession in the free media outlet already explained to me that there are risks associated when you work for a free media organization. You can be arrested. Things might happen to you. I already knew about this. I also already read about this. I researched into this. Since 1990s in Turkey, hundreds of journalists have been killed. They were lost during custody. They disappeared during custody. They were massacred. We all know about this. It's not new for us. When I started to work in the media, they already told me there are risks associated with this profession, and I still accepted this knowingly. So when you talk about the process in Nusaybin, we should think of it in the whole picture of the solution process, in the whole context of the solution process, the Kurdish problem solution process. It was a new situation. It was a bit of an unexpected situation for us, a new situation for us. But when I went there, I knew that there were many risks, starting with arrest, ranging up to death. And the journalists who were detained, they told me afterwards that the policeman asked them about me when they were taken under custody, and I informed my agency about this. Then my agency told me, please come back. You should leave that zone, otherwise you will be subjected to great risks. You will be arrested. And I knew that this was unavoidable, but in spite of this, I wanted to carry on, because in that area, there was a totally different process. It was a war happening there. It was a war unfolding there. Several civilians, hundreds of civilians were killed. These people were seen as terrorists. When you look at the statements of the prefectorate, they were saying that 2 terrorists were killed in the conflicts that happened. But when you look at the people they called terrorists, for example, Selamettin Yeşilmen, she was a woman, a mother of 7. She was in her house. Just because she opened the door of her house and she was standing in front of her house, she was massacred by the government forces. They proclaimed her as a terrorist. Also, there was another person called Hussein. I don't remember his name, but there was an old uncle, 55 years old, and he was in his pajamas, in slippers. Because there was a bomb exploding outside, he went outside his house, and at that time, he was an armored vehicle, and he was actually killed with a machine gun, and the door that was standing behind him was covered with holes. It had become like a sieve, and I was the person who was the report on this. I had the responsibility to report on this, so I still took all of these into account, and I still dared to report on these events.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Thank you very much indeed. That's it for me. Thank you.
I will give the floor to you, Judge and the Westhuizen. Yeah.
Ms. Oktay, yes, I also admire the work that you've done and your courage, and I congratulate you that you made it by foot all the way through Europe to here in Switzerland. It must have been physically difficult apart from all the other dangers. My question is very short. What terrorist organization were you accused of being a member? And linked to that, I got a bit confused with the different time periods. How much time, what was your sentence? And don't go again into all the courts and the appeals and so on. That is a bit confusing. But just in practice, how much time did you then spend in jail because of this criminal charge, not the previous detentions? Thank you.
Direct reply.
Yes, PKK, terrorist organization, was a terrorist organization for which I was accused of being a member and making a propaganda of. And I was sentenced to 4 years of imprisonment. And I was sent to prison to serve 3/4 of this. And for 4 months I was in Mardin, and the rest I was in Gebze. So it was about, it was almost 3 years. So it was actually 2 years, 11 months. Yeah, almost 3 years, let's say.
Forget the propaganda, but were you a member of PKK? Of course, I'm not saying they're a terrorist organization at all, but were you at least a member, apart now from your news reports? If you're willing to say.
Being a member of a PKK is based on certain criteria. It requires certain criteria, but I have never ever been a member of the PKK. I am currently not a member of the PKK organization. I'm only a journalist, but I also defend the struggle for freedom, the rights of the Kurdish people. That's the reason why I was working for the free media. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this testimony, yes, full of courage. And so we will finish with your testimony and we'll go to another one.